Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Freedom by Swami Sarvarpiananda. So I looked at this and it says that it is Guyana. Freedom with Guyana. I mean, all of them are supposed to be freedom. A freedom from samsara and rebirth and suffering. But I wonder why he specifically calls this one freedom. Anyways, let's go ahead and start it.
Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Surai Satchid Sukha Swarupaya Swami Netapaharine. Today I would like to talk about Swami Vivekananda's lecture, Freedom of the Soul. So that's why we have titled this talk, Freedom. Swami Vivekananda starts with a very, what will feel like a very contemporary note today. He says that the Vedantic ideal of freedom is a very democratic kind of spirituality. He said that just as in the West we see that people are ever pushing for higher and higher ideas of freedom and democracy, that they find it intolerable that anybody should rule over them, from the rule of feudal chiefs to the rule of kings to a democratic nation where power is distributed equally among all citizens. And some of that process we see it's still happening. It's an ongoing process. What you see today in the streets of big cities and towns in the United States today. He says exactly the same thing happened in the realm of spirituality and philosophy in ancient India. In the Vedas, you find there's a movement from the many Vedic gods to one God. That there is one supreme power which rules and controls the universe. But at one point, the Vedic thinkers found even that intolerable. And so the one personal God was quickly made into an impersonal principle which is distributed throughout the universe, which is immanent in the universe, in every being, in everything, in everybody. So from many gods to one God, one personal God, the supreme creator of the universe, to an impersonal principle, an absolute, which is in and through everybody. So there is nobody who is like a ruler of the universe and the rest of us are ruled or subjects.
Whenever he was talking about in the streets of the big cities, recently in YouTube, I saw some videos of the streets of some big cities in the United States. They go the way I thought, which was there are a lot of homeless people and people are addicted to drugs, which is very sad. You know, it's way off topic, but that's what I thought of, and I don't know, I make faces sometimes. That's a good read on me. It's my face. And whenever he said that, it made me think of those videos, and it was just very interesting. I watch a lot of it. I watch a few of it, actually, and it's just really sad to see all these potential people that could be doing great things, but instead are now suffering from their addiction, trying to get the next hit.
You see, the movement towards one God, monotheism. Swami Vivekananda says in another place, in the West here, I am afraid your much vaunted monotheism is but halfway house. Beyond monotheism. See, what happened was from many gods to one God, which is a primary teaching of the Abrahamic religions. Islam and Christianity get it from Judaism. But even before Judaism, the Zoroastrians were really the first who came to this idea that there is one God, Ahura Mazda, which is the supreme power in this universe. Swami Vivekananda says even this is halfway house. Beyond the one God, higher than that, subtler than that, is this absolute principle, which is the reality of the entire universe, which is the reality within each of us.
Whenever he said that, it reminded me of like when he said many gods to one god, and the one god's the halfway house. It reminded me of perhaps Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think perhaps him mostly, where he said, we're all atheistic. It's just a matter that some of us are just one god away. So basically, like how you have the Christian and Islam. Some say they're the same God, some say they're different. Then you have, of course, the Greek, Roman, Vikings, the Egyptian gods, all these gods. Christianity doesn't believe in any of these gods. So they're atheistic in terms of those. But they're just one away from being a true atheist. And this reminds me of what they said, where they're in a halfway house, they're just one God away from being an atheist, basically.
So from the personal God to the impersonal principle, which is, what is that impersonal principle in the entire universe? It is existence, being itself. All things which exist, objects and living beings, up to the highest God, all are manifestations of one fundamental being, which is called Sat, pure being. Not only is God deconstructed and found to be the absolute, but the human being, the individual, is also not left as a person. The Upanishads investigate the individual. And are we just bundles of flesh and bone? Are we just minds, bodies and minds? And they found in this body-mind complex that same impersonal principle, and a principle of awareness or consciousness, which illumines the body and the mind and the senses. So the individual is now investigated and found to be this pure consciousness. And the reality of the entire universe is found to be this pure being. And this pure consciousness and pure being were found to be in a grand synthesis, one and the same reality. The Upanishads come to this grand statement of identity. Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. That meaning, that reality of God. Beyond even God is that pure being. And thou means you, the individual, who thought that you were a tiny creature of flesh and blood. You are actually this immortal consciousness, the spirit, the immortal consciousness. And this spirit within each of us, and that one reality of this universe, it's exactly the same. That thou art. The Upanishads proclaim this in different ways, but they come to this conclusion. The Chandogya Upanishad, it says this, Tat Tvamasi, that thou art, 9 times in the 6th chapter.
Before he goes on to the next one, I do wonder, I started thinking about what he said there, and it makes me wonder about the scientists who say, or the materialistic scientists, right? Where we're just the brain. Perhaps maybe a portion of the brain, which is something I do believe in as well. That, we're somewhere in the brain, and when you remove that one piece, whatever that piece happens to be, we don't know what it is yet. But if you remove that piece, you won't be there anymore. Your body can still function normally, as in, you have certain parts of your brain that does things automatically. When you get touched here, you are no longer aware, but your body is aware, just a reactive chemicals, because when you get touched there, chemicals get sent up to the brain, and then a certain part of the brain activates, but it would go to where you are, but it's not there anymore, so there's nothing to be done. Anyways, sorry. But the material scientists, I wonder what they would say about that, where you are God, because the way I explain it is by everything must manifest in your consciousness for you to be aware of it. So for example, looking at this pen again, even though this is an object externally, I'm not aware of it right here. I'm feeling in my hand being sent to my body, to my brain, and then in my consciousness, that's where I'm aware of it. I'm aware that it's a certain distance away, but that's because of my eyes sending it into my brain, telling me that my consciousness being aware of all of this stuff, everything must manifest in my consciousness. I wonder if a scientist, a brain scientist, I don't know which one, would say that everything must manifest in your consciousness for you to be aware of it. Therefore, everything in this universe must exist in your consciousness. That I don't know of. The reason why I can't exactly necessarily react to some of those videos, a lot of them will just get blocked, although I'm curious to watch them just to see what they say. I wonder if they'd say that. Because that's the thing that I do believe in so far, is the fact that the consciousness is where I guess I do believe it to be in our brain. Is it external? Is it something that's grand, everything? It depends on how you interpret that for me.
The Aitreya Upanishad in the Rig Veda, it says Prajnanam Brahma. The consciousness that each one of us we feel within ourselves is none other than the reality of the universe, Brahman. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad from the Yajur Veda, it says Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I who thought I was just this little creature, I am the absolute reality Brahman. The Mandukya Upanishad from the Atharva Veda, it says, I am Atma Brahma. This very self, this individual which you think yourself to be, is in reality Brahman, the absolute reality of the universe. So this was what we might call the democratization of spirituality. Then came the age of the philosophers, the age of system building. After the Upanishads, then there's the Sutra literature. The great philosophical systems of ancient India, the Nyaya Sutras of Gautama, the Vaisheshika Sutras of Kanada, most ancient, the Sankhya system of Kapila, the well-known, to even today all over the world, the Yoga system of Yoga Sutras, the Yoga system of Patanjali, and other systems, both heterodox and orthodox, the great systems of Buddhism and Jainism. So they came up. There the question was asked. It is all very well to say that there's one reality, Brahman, but the question is, how does this one become the many? Because there's no doubt that we perceive the many. This vast and complex universe with its myriad creatures, with its millions of planets and stars. How does one impersonal, featureless being, consciousness, appear as, become this many? How does the one become the many? Or in a less philosophical form, the problem of evil, which is something that every religion has to contend with. If you believe in God, then how is it that if there is an all-powerful, loving and just God, how is there suffering in the universe? How is there so much sorrow in this universe?
And you know, that's a thing that a lot of people ask, and the only answer I've ever heard was, it's part of God's plan. It's either that, it's part of God's plan, so they don't have to explain it. Again, this kind of goes back to bhakti a little bit, where they don't question God, they just accept the things as they are and they continue to worship them. So like the reason for suffering and all that, and that's the reason why I think people who truly follow the path of bhakti are happy, is because you don't have to figure these things out. They happen, okay, continue living on, continue being happy, continue worshiping. And I think that's the reason why they're genuinely happy. They don't have to have an answer for everything necessarily. If it happens, it happens. Do the best you can and keep on going. Where people tend to say, okay, what happened? What went wrong? I need to figure this out. It's going to irritate me. I need to know it now. And it'll bug them for many days, weeks, years even, until they get an answer. So there's this how to say, I won't say itch, but it's a irritant in the back of your head that every time you think about it, just like, I need to know the answer. But anyways, so the answers I've heard is it's all part of God's plan, or it's a form of punishment from God, or it's a way of, it's a test. Actually, that's the next thing. It's a test. It's either part of His plan or a test. Those are the two answers I've heard of.
Just by moving from theistic religion to Advaita Vedanta does not solve the problem. You can put it in this way also. If we are all Brahman, if this world is existence, consciousness, bliss, if that is the reality, then why is there suffering? The same problem still persists. Why is there limitation and suffering and sorrow and degradation? If we are immortal, why do we go through birth and death? So on. So these two questions, they are not two but two, one in the philosophical form, how does the one become the many, and the other in a more practical form, why do we suffer? What is the answer? The different philosophies gave different answers. One becomes the many, the relationship between one and the many. The theistic religions said the one creates the many. God creates this universe. And there are many philosophical problems with this. The Sankhya system says not God, but there is nature. Nature creates this diverse universe. So in Prakriti, which in principle is not so different from a modern scientific, modern cosmological approach. When we say in today's language that from the Big Bang all of this has emerged, if you ask what was there before the Big Bang, the only answer is that there was what is called a singularity. So from a singularity comes the Big Bang, and from that has emerged this entire physical universe.
Before we get on with that one too, it's very interesting because everyone always wonders what happened before the Big Bang. There's a singularity. Okay, what happened before the singularity? Scientists don't know. This is what I heard from Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's like, well, they don't know, and that's okay. A lot of people want an answer. Again, that's another thing. This is what I said. Like, people who follow Bhakti, it's fine, whatever. It's happened, it happened. Where I'm like, I need to know what happened before and what happened before that one. But I have to learn to live with not knowing the answer because I understand it's very difficult to find out. But it's very interesting what Swami Madanda has said, that there is no beginning. It's an infinite, it's a, how do I say, an infinite number of lives with no beginning. Now that is interesting. That can explain some things, but to me there always has to be a beginning. What happens, but then again my mind might go to like, what happened before the beginning? Which makes no sense because the beginning is the start and nothing comes before it. So perhaps, I guess maybe I answered my own question. That singularity, nothing happened before that. But what created the matter though? My brain just asking questions all the time.
Not so different in principle. When the Sankhyan says, from Prakriti, which is like a singularity, has emerged this entire universe of diversity. But anyway, one creates the many. Whether it is God or Prakriti or whatever you call it. Advaita Vedanta says that not that the one has become the many, not that the one has created the many, rather the one appears as the many. One absolute reality, being, consciousness, bliss, Satchidananda, remaining that, appears as this universe. One remaining the one appears as subject and object. Swami Vivekananda says, one only exists. It appears as nature and soul, the subject and the object. It is not that the rope becomes the snake. The rope appears as the snake. And this has a deep consequence. The consequence is this, that if the universe is an appearance of Brahman, if our individuality, our jivahood, that we are this little sentient being born and aging and subject to disease and old age and death, if all this is an appearance and not in reality, and in reality we are somehow, right at this moment, we are that one, that existence, consciousness, bliss, then freedom from suffering, freedom from this world of bondage, that freedom must be our nature already. If we are Brahman at this point, then we are already free. It is not a freedom that has to be gained. So some of the theistic, dualistic systems say that freedom is possible. Freedom from life and death, the cycle of life and death is possible. But right now we are in bondage. And by the grace of God, by our spiritual practices, and finally by the grace of God, we will go beyond bondage into freedom. Advaita opposes that. So Advaita says that if we are in bondage, and by spiritual practice or by the grace of God, if bondage ends and freedom begins, moksha begins, then there is a problem. The problem is that which begins did not exist earlier. If it did not exist earlier, it's quite possible that it will not exist later also. A moksha which was not existing, somehow it comes into existence, can again go out of existence. What good would that moksha be? If moksha, freedom, has a beginning, it could have an end. And a freedom which has an end, how is it in any way how is it better than samsara, which is full of beginnings and ends?
That's weird. The way I was thinking about that is the fact that there can be a beginning, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to have an end. Perhaps. Like, again, in this, like, I guess you look at it in terms of Abrahamic religion, where you're born into this world, and this world is your test to go whether you go to heaven or hell. And there is where you will live eternally. So, in this test, you die, you go to heaven, you have eternal bliss, or you go to hell, you have eternal torture. It's not that it will never end. I mean, this life, I wonder what it would say about that. But also, I was thinking, whenever he said that about it'll never end, I don't know why I thought of this, but anyway, not really related, but I thought of this. If you go to heaven, you have no choice, you have no real freedom, because you must be happy. There is nothing, you cannot be sad. Heaven is not something to be sad about. You cannot go up there and be sad. And this is something I thought about some time ago, where imagine you go to heaven and then your children or a loved one goes to hell. The only thing you can be thinking when you're looking down at your loved one being tortured is that you're happy. It's weird to say, but that would have to be true. I don't think heaven is supposed to be sad at all. I think it's supposed to be eternal bliss, at least from my understanding. So you're yourself minus any sadness. It's just pure happiness. So you're looking down at your loved one being eternally tortured, and you are eternally happy. I don't know, that's weird, off topic.
Creation and destruction, birth and death. So the dualistic idea of freedom, that it is something to be gained, which we do not have and we will have in the future, it is a logical problem. That's why Advaita Vedanta says our bondage, our suffering, our limitation is only apparent. In reality, we are Brahman and our very nature is freedom, and we are already free. It is just that we do not know it, just that we do not see it. So if there is bondage at all, the bondage is of the nature of ignorance, of not knowing our innate freedom. Moksha is our swarupa. Freedom is our very nature. So this is basically the thrust of Swami Vivekananda's talk, that the freedom is the very nature of the soul. It is not something that the soul gains, had, lost, and will gain again. It's not something that the soul has to earn by its sadhana. Rather, spiritual practice at most can remove the delusion that we are not free. Evil, suffering. Why is there suffering? Similarly, the dualistic systems, they conceive of suffering in different ways. One way has been to blame evil on a power. So God is on the side of the good, and there is a power, call it Satan or Shaitan, the devil, which is the source of evil. Here also, it was the Zoroastrians who first came up with this idea. So Ahura Mazda was the god of light, the god of the universe. And all problems, all suffering and evil was caused by an entity called Ahriman, the forces of darkness. And the whole of the universe was understood as this perpetual struggle between light and darkness, and we human beings have to choose the side of light to be saved. So this idea is a dualistic idea. Vedanta does not agree with it. Vedanta says what we consider to be evil is a superimposition, an appearance, no more real than the snake which is imagined on the rope by error, by mistake. Not knowing that we are the limitless being, not knowing that we are this constant awareness, not knowing that we are this infinite bliss. We think that we are these limited creatures of flesh and blood, that we have to seek for happiness, we have to seek for security in this inconstant world, and we suffer. This ocean of samsara. So suffering and evil are superimpositions. In the technical word is adhyasa, an appearance, an unreal coating, if you will. It is that infinite being, Sat, which we are, which appears in our life as life and death, birth and death. It is that infinite consciousness which appears in our life as knowledge and ignorance also, that we know certain things and we know that we are ignorant of certain things. Both are kinds of knowledge. And so this one consciousness appears as all kinds of knowledge and ignorance in our lives. It is that one infinite bliss, Ananda, which appears as the rishis, Swami Vivekananda says the rishis were bold enough to say all the worldly joys, big and small, intense and dull, all kinds of worldly pleasures, they are just drops in the ocean of bliss which we are. So it's our own nature which is appearing as this world. At this point, to understand this, we must confront the objections to this. Just yesterday, Professor Arindam Chakravarti was telling us that to understand any kind of Siddhanta conclusion, one must examine the opposite point of view also. The most powerful objections to this philosophy should be taken up in all seriousness and investigated. Once you know the opposition, once you know the objections thoroughly, then only you can understand the depth of your own position.
Completely agree with that one. That's something that I try to do whenever I get into anything. This is the reason why I like listening to people, and I question everything. The reason why I question that's to better understand their position, and to also gain knowledge. If you don't question anything, you don't really gain too much knowledge. You can gain some knowledge, but generally by doing something, you gain knowledge, and that's in a sense questioning. It's like by grabbing this pen, like, oh, so by pushing this, I see the pen tip come out. In a sense, it's a form of question, in my opinion. Because otherwise, if you don't question it, you just look at it. Oh yes, that is nice. I don't know what it does, but I will just look at it. Oh, now I can write. my opinion. I don't know. You can let me know if you agree with that one or not. But yes, I always try, whenever I watch debates and stuff on YouTube, I always try to understand both perspectives. It's very hard sometimes, especially people with extreme points of views, to take them seriously, but I have to try to understand. And most of the time with people with extreme points of views, they don't make any sense anyway.
Often we try to paper over the objections because we may be afraid. Suppose the opposition and the objection is powerful and convincing, we may lose conviction in our own philosophy. But if the philosophy is so weak that you lose conviction in it when the first few blows come, it's better to let it go. Whereas Advaita Vedanta is so strong that the strongest of opposition can only serve to strengthen it further. When you can take up the most searching, penetrating questions and find the answers to that and solve those questions, your faith and your conviction in Advaita will become deeper.
And that's why every time in my head I question the crap out of everything I believe. I try to find a way to destroy my own beliefs. And if I can't, that just strengthens my belief. That's why I always present my ideas to people just to see how they can poke a hole into it. And but yeah, and I noticed earlier in the YouTube channel where people are wondering why I was questioning so many things. And I'm like, well, that's just the way I am, and that's how I figure out whether their statement or my belief is very strong. I learn from many different things, and with as much knowledge as I can, any idea that I have, I throw everything at it, even the kitchen sink at it if I can, just to see if it can stand up to the scrutiny. And if it can, it's a pretty strong belief. If it can't, then I'll keep it in the back of my mind and not necessarily use it as an argument, but still maybe present it to people to see what they think about it.
So what are the major objections to this kind of a philosophy? Swami Vivekananda, this is all from Swami Vivekananda's talk. I was seeing that he raised most powerful objections to Advaita. If you look at his presentation of Advaita, it follows the format of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. First, he tells us the truth, which we were talking about, the Upanishadic truth, that you are Brahman. Then in Manana means the process of reasoning and reflection. He raises these powerful objections, which we will look at now, and then find solutions to it. And then finally, the stage of Nididhyasana, meditation or assimilation. So what are these objections? In today's age, and Swami Vivekananda mentions this more than 100 years ago, scientific materialism. Scientific materialism says that matter and energy are real, not your consciousness, Atman, Brahman. Scientific materialism says that on the stage of space, time and causation, this is the theater stage, and the actors are matter and energy, and they produce the entire universe, living and non-living, not your pure being, consciousness or spirit or whatever it is.
Well, according to the three realities, or whatever you want to call it, the subjective, objective, or as Swami likes to say here, the transactional and then absolute. In terms of the transactional, or what I call objective truth, it is real. In this level, it is. Your subjective truth, that generally he says about dreams, maybe hallucinations, I call it subjective, is because sometimes, when people see this, they think it's gray, but I maybe say it's black, like the color stuff with the skirt. Some people say it was like blue and white. Some people say it's, I forget what the other color is. I see blue and white on that dress. Then the shoes, that's subjective, oddly enough, because it's very, very odd that how we perceive colors as we're growing up gets influenced. So what someone says maybe orange might say red. But anyways, objective truth, but the thing is so that we can have a machine that measures it and says this is the precise color value of that, whereas how we perceive it is subjective. So we have the subjective, objective, or I call objective, or as he says, transactional, and then absolute. Brahman, pure consciousness. This is the materialistic realm, which is objective or transactional. So in terms of this realm, yeah, it's real. The material, whatever he was saying here, the material, everything is made with, because it exists within this realm, it's real in this realm. I don't know if he'll say that though.
It is matter and energy, which is transformed into the stars and planets of this universe. And on this planet, maybe some other planets also, the same matter, it undergoes transformations and gives rise to living matter, living bodies. And by the process of evolution, these bodies become more and more sophisticated, intricate, and they generate sophisticated nervous systems and brains. And in these nervous systems and brains, by some process, consciousness is produced. Bill was telling me just day before yesterday, from a scientific perspective, modern scientific perspective, human beings are an afterthought. Human beings, consciousness are the secondary, afterthought, epiphenomenon, byproduct. This is the materialistic challenge, and very powerful. Science is the main Purva Paksha today, the great opponent today. Then there is...
Okay. I'm going to pause right here before we get some part 2. So that's very interesting. I definitely should be watching some of those science views just to see how they interpret things too. And the interesting thing about consciousness, that is, I wonder if that is, I want to be open-minded and see if that's true. Like, what if our consciousness is in fact a byproduct, which is kind of weird. Because animals tend to act instinctually, but I don't know. I don't think it's all just purely instincts. There's obviously something a little bit more, perhaps not as sophisticated as our ways of thinking, but I'm trying to think of animals, and I think of dogs and cats because those are the ones we interact with the most, and they do tend to have a higher level of thinking, a higher level of thinking, just because we can train them, teach them to do things, and they can show some form of emotion. Then you think, I think dolphins are pretty smart, and pigs are quite smart too. So I'm trying to think, do they also have consciousness as well? And I wonder what scientists would say about that. And while obviously in Advaita Vedanta everything has consciousness, even this pen, it is made out of consciousness. Whether it can think or not is a different story. And perhaps that is what is the difference here between the materialistic and Advaita Vedanta, is the fact that the consciousness just shines awareness to things. But what makes us us is the ability to think and to be aware of the awareness. I have to refine that, but I think Advaita Vedanta says that everything is pure consciousness. So everything is consciousness. But how? But what makes us different from, say, a pen, what makes me different from this pen, is I have a brain to think. I have to think about that one. The only difference between me and the pen is that I have a brain to think. Kinda. I mean, obviously I have to eat and drink and stuff, and I can reproduce and all that, but it's all part of the material realm. But outside of that, the absolute reality is that there's no difference between me and the pen. But I have a brain to think. I'm aware of myself as because of my brain. I know what I can do because of my brain. But both me and the pen are pure consciousness. That makes me think about it a little bit differently. Anyways, gotta pause right here for part 1 of Freedom by Swami Sarvapriyananda. I've been wanting to do questions, but I keep forgetting. So hopefully the next one I don't forget. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.